Welcome everyone. This is National Natural Family Planning Awareness Week, and we have a special topic today that we'll be discussing. I'm your host, Theresa Notare, the Assistant Director of the Natural Family Planning Program of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, NFP Ministry. And we have two wonderful guests today, Dr. Michael Manhart and Dr. Richard Fehring. Dr. Manhart is the former Executive Director of the Couple to Couple League International. He has a doctorate in microbiology from the University of Cincinnati College of Medicine, and he worked in research and development with Procter Gamble for many, many years. Dr. Manhart and his wife, Karen, served as volunteer teachers with the Couple to Couple League for over 30 years. Very dedicated. And he also served on the CCL Board of Directors from 2007 to 2009. And in July of 2009, he was appointed the Executive Director of CCL and held that position until 2016. Currently, he is the chairman of the CCL Board of Directors, and he and his wife continue to teach the Sympto-Thermal Method of natural family planning. And our other speaker, Dr. Richard Fehring, is Professor Emeritus and Director of the Marquette University College of Nursing, the Institute for Natural Family Planning in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Dr. Fehring received his master's degree as well as his doctorate in nursing from the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. And he has published over 180 articles and book chapters and co-edited 3 books and has generated over $3 million in research and foundation grants on various research projects that he's worked on in natural family planning. His research interests include effectiveness of fertility awareness methods, marital responses to family planning, and religious influences on human sexuality. So we'll begin with Dr. Manhart. We'll have 20 minutes where Dr. Manhart will give his presentation, followed by Dr. Fehring for another 20 minutes, and then we'll open it up to questions from our participants. And so I'm not quite sure how many people will be joining us, and I think it may be easiest to put your question in the chat boxes that the platform we're using will provide. And myself and one of our assistants at the Bishops' Conference, Teresa Lewis, will take a look at those questions. And there's Teresa waving. We will take a look at the questions and we'll have hopefully a fruitful conversation. So thank you, Dr. Manhart, if you would take over.
Thanks, Teresa. Welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. So what Richard and I will spend the next 30, 40 minutes doing is trying to give you some perspective on this whole thing called femtech. This is by no means comprehensive, but we hope that you'll get some flavor of what the field is, what the strengths and weaknesses are, and give you some, hopefully some useful tools to be able to more critically evaluate all of these new technologies that are emerging and claiming to be useful for so-called natural methods. First of all, let's talk a little bit about what we mean when we say femtech. This is sort of a business area, if you will, or a business nomenclature that's come about because of the convergence of an increased focus on women's health, specifically women, health issues unique to women, along with the advancement of new technologies, primarily digital technologies. And you can see on the slide there, it covers a whole number of areas from fertility tracking to menstrual care to just general health care for women. Many of these technologies and focus areas in specific businesses with startups and whatnot are completely inconsistent with Catholic thought and Catholic ethics. But many of these things could well be utilized effectively in the natural family planning context. Just to give you a sense of the size, again, it says there, the fertility services market is expected to be $30 billion market just in a couple of years from now. So what we're going to talk about today are sort of 3 basic topics. We'll talk a little bit about wearables, primarily wearable basal body thermometers. spend some time talking about fertility apps and hopefully give you a sense about how to come to terms with this explosion in apps that are everywhere. And then we'll talk about some of the most promising and technologically robust stuff in the urinary hormone monitors. Richard will do the great majority of talking there. So I'm going to cover the first few things. When we talk about wearables, there's a lot of appeal among women for them. First, for the convenience factor. If you're wearing something that records your temperature all night long, you don't have to worry about waking up at the same time every day. There's a perception that if I'm up and down with a newborn or my sleep is disrupted, maybe this will do a better job than my first morning rising temperature. And it's certainly seen as easier by folks. And that's all well and good, but if you've got someone who's trying to use a Sympto-Thermal Method or a temperature method in NFP, and she struggles remembering to take her temperature in the morning anyway, what is it she's going to do to remember to put on the device before she goes to bed every night? So some of the same behavioral issues may come into play here. And of course, the cost of a wearable is a lot more than an oral temperature, an oral thermometer. One of the better developed wearable temperature devices is TempDrop here. It will record your temperature overnight, and it's got a pretty sophisticated algorithm. I've talked with the developers in some length about how it determines the lowest temperature of your night, or the temperature that's closest to your true basal body temperature. It's worn in your arm, held on with an elastic strap. And in the end of the day, when you wake up or whenever you want to check, you just link into the TempDrop app, and it will grab the temperature recorded from that night and display it. Costs range from $160 up, and there's different pricing tiers depending on how much warranty coverage you want and whatnot. And it will sync with the Chart Neo app, which is a fertility charting app that's come out from the Neo Fertility folks. And this is a pretty good app, although there is an important consideration that after about 14 days of temperature recording, the algorithm in the app and in the device itself will begin to modify the historical temperatures so the temperature graph looks less ragged. It will smooth the temperatures out so the thermal shift is easier to detect. But there's actually no information on whether or not that has an impact on its use in natural family planning. So when I'm counseling women who want to use this app, I just recommend that they grab the temperature on the day and record it somewhere else. And that won't change then over time. So another device, a little more higher tech, is the Ava Bracelet. This is worn like a wristwatch. And not only does it capture temperature, but a number of other physiologic parameters, skin conductivity, heart rate, respiration, that sort of stuff. They claim that they can define the most fertile days of the cycle today. It's a little expensive, it's $300. But there's really no correlation on what wrist temperature does with oral BBTs. And you can imagine in the wintertime, sleeping with your arm outside or inside the blanket, that wrist temperature might be different. And how does the machine know that? That's kind of important. Of course, there's no effectiveness data for any of the other parameters that are measured there relating to the menstrual cycle or their application to NFP use. So it may someday be an interesting technology, but right now it's an expensive thermometer of somewhat questionable application for NFP. And this is representative of a number of sorts of things in the wearable areas. I will say I think wearables are going to become more and more common, and we'll see more and more applications of them. The challenge will be, will they develop the data to show they have utility and proven effectiveness in a natural family planning setting, either to avoid or conceive. So fertility apps is another huge area. I'm sure most of you are aware of it. The current estimates are there's somewhere around 15 million women in the United States that are currently using a tracking app today. Now, we all know that there aren't 15 million women using natural family planning today. And so I would submit, for those of us trying to get more people to think about it, this is a huge opportunity for us. We've got folks already interested in knowing more about their cycles, 15 million of them that have spent money or spent the time to start to look at an app. How do we think about moving them to using an NFP method? There are well over 1,000 fertility apps on smartphones out there today. And among teenagers, these fertility trackers are the #2 most frequently downloaded health app. #1 are the activity trackers like your Fitbit. But unfortunately, there isn't a lot of science behind these things. Now, if with 1,000 apps, it's kind of difficult to begin to wrap your head around how you might organize these. And what I like to do is think about, for a potential user, what sort of application would he or she be wanting to use? Okay, so do you just want to track your cycle length? Well, if that's the case, your iPhone can do that today. It's in your health app on your iPhone. And any free period tracker will tell you, what's going on, let you track your cycles. If you want to predict the day of ovulation, there's a lot of apps that claim they can predict ovulation. And as I'll show in a minute, most of these are based on calendar observations and calendar predictions, and that's really not a very accurate predictor for ovulation. Several apps will record fertility observations, and Kindara would be an example of one of those. But importantly, if you're using one of those things and you get into an atypical cycle or you don't know what to do with your observations, reaching out for help from the developers of those apps will probably result in a busy signal or no response whatsoever. And then there are, of course, apps that both record and interpret your fertile window and your observations. But again, very few of those will follow a proven natural family planning. So we'll just go through some examples here. Period tracking apps, here's 3 popular ones, Flow, Glow, and Clue. So Flow uses your period start date to estimate your ovulation and predict the start of your next period. Glow, many of you probably remember when it was launched several years ago, they had a guarantee that if you weren't pregnant in a year using Glow, they would pay for your IVF. So you can imagine the ethics that are behind all of that. They've now expanded. They've got a whole family of different apps for pregnancy and early birth and all kinds of things. But the financial incentive behind Glow is not to help women, but it's really to collect large amounts of information that can be sold to marketers so they can be more effective in targeted advertising online. So that's often the case with many of these things. Clue is another one of these fertility tracking apps, and to Clue's credit, they say right on their website that if you're going to use this to postpone pregnancy, you should go get formal training in a fertility awareness method. So not everybody's bad, but there's a wide range there. Ovulation predicting apps, as I said, most of these apps use cycle length as a primary indicator, but the research data would say that the best indicators to predict the day of ovulation are either peak cervical mucus or luteinizing hormone peaks. And you can see here in a study from EchoShard in 2001, he had over 100 women with ultrasound, daily ultrasounds, and 74% of the cycles showed that they had peak cervical mucus within a day of the ultrasound ovulation. And 68% of the cycles had an LH peak within a day of the ultrasound ovulation. And I believe it was even a little higher percentage for the first appearance of LH in that study, but that's pretty good. Now this graph is taken from a recent study by Johnson et al. To show why calendar prediction for ovulation is not good. This study had 900 women collect urine every day, and they monitored LH every day, and they assumed the day of ovulation was the peak day of LH +1. So the gray bars are the days that ovulation occurred, and on the vertical axis here, they've stratified the 900 women into the days of cycle. So for example, there are 119 women who had a 28-day cycle, and you can see that the day of ovulation ranged from day 11 to day 20 among all of these 28-day cycles. So all of these cycles were 28 days, but ovulation ranged from 11 to 20 across a 9-day window. The most frequent day of ovulation was day 16. And you can see that applies regardless of cycle length. So if you use period start to predict your day of ovulation, it's going to be a pretty wide-ranging ballpark estimate. Example of a couple of ovulation predicting apps, Fertility Friend and Ovia. Fertility Friend claims they have 4 ways to define ovulation, and it will let you input basal body temperature, mucus, and hormone data. But how it interprets that is not disclosed, and the default setting, which is what most people will use, is a calendar-based prediction. And Ovia has a proprietary algorithm to come up with a so-called fertility score. And I share with Ovia because that's really not marketed to individuals, but that's marketed to companies who want to have women employees use this in an attempt to better manage their healthcare costs. So once again, we see this technology being used for something far different than individuals understanding their fertility, and really more about what they can do to save costs for people who pay the bills on healthcare. Fertility tracking apps, of course, are an area that we have a lot of interest in. Unfortunately, most of these apps are created by individuals or groups without any real NFP experience or connection to NFP. There is a fair amount of risk of the data being shared, the user data being shared without them necessarily knowing it. Now, Facts conducted a systemic review of the apps in 2016. I want to review that just a little bit. So what they did is they found the apps that they could download for free that would allow them to avoid pregnancy as a tracking option. Then they tried to identify the specific method that was employed by the app. And then we had a set of, I think it was 6 or 7 specific cycles that were supplied by various NFP organizations that had a known fertility window. We entered the daily information into the app, and then we compared the output of the app. When did the app say the fertile window was compared to what the expert organization said the fertile window was for that specific cycle? And the results were kind of interesting. Of the 95 apps that were initially identified, over half of them, or 55, were rejected. They didn't have an evidence-based fertility awareness method deployed. They weren't designed to avoid pregnancy, and there was importantly no way for the user to override any observations or input their own information. Of the 40 apps that met the screening criteria and then had all that data entered into them, 30 of those 40 predicted the fertile window, but only 6 of those 30 had a quality score of 4 or higher. So a lot of apps were less than high quality, according to the rubric that Facts was using. Of the 10 apps that did not predict the fertile window, but allowed people to capture their observations, 4 met the quality score. So again, these apps are available, but not all of them are high quality. There's been a more recent review that really was a scoping review, and it looked at the evidence behind these fertility tracking apps. And these are the big conclusions that I've taken from that study. And it's consistent with what I've been saying. The number of apps that we have is large, and it's growing, and they're increasingly popular. And women are using these apps for a range of reasons: to avoid, to conceive, to track their cycles, and their motivations and goals will shift over time. And this reviewer pointed out that the developers have really been insensitive to this important point. How a 25-year-old uses an app may be very different at 25 than when she's 35 or 40. Women do want apps that are accurate and based on scientific information, but this review concluded that not all the apps accurately predict the fertile window, which is what we've been saying. And there's a paucity of evidence-based research behind them. And they also pointed out that it's notable that there were an absence of fertility and health professionals involved in the development and use of these apps. So that's the latest information that came out in 2019. So I want to do a little deeper dive on a couple of newer apps. Natural Cycles is one you've probably all heard of. It's the FDA approved app. I think it was August of 2018 when it got its approval. It uses a temperature-only proprietary algorithm to define the fertile window. And importantly, it doesn't say abstain during the fertile window, but it says abstain or use a barrier. So condom use is encouraged in this. So this really isn't an NFP method. And I believe Richard calls this perfect condom targeting or perfect condom use, right? Targeted TCU. Targeted condom use. So we'll have to give that credit to Richard for that terminology. So the study that led to FDA approval for this is an interesting one to look at. It involved over 20,000 women. These were women who had subscribed to the app and were using it to avoid pregnancy. They captured 1,200 pregnancies in this study, which is a lot, but relative to 20,000 women, it's not not unexpected. The effectiveness rates are about 8 to 9% typical use, depending on how you treat some of the unknown people. and 1% with perfect use. But again, both of those numbers are caveated with the fact that condoms could have been used in the fertile window. Importantly, more than half of the people discontinued the study early, and just 30% of the women in the trial finished a full year of use. So long-term persistence with this is certainly a question. Some of the concerns from this study are clearly the undisclosed condom use rate, because perfect use was intercourse on fertile days with a condom or abstinence. There's a certain question about the robustness of the data. This was a real world study. They captured women who were already using the apps and agreed to participate in a study and agreed to have their data shared. But in half of the pregnancies that were documented, there was no intercourse recorded in those cycles. And I certainly don't think we've seen the Immaculate Conception reenacted 600 plus times in the last few years. So, the other issue on the robustness of the data is just the detection of pregnancy. Many of these the pregnancies were confirmed by pregnancy tests, which is good. A few of them used a proprietary algorithm, which wasn't disclosed, but there weren't really very many of those. But 20% of the pregnancies were just determined to be pregnant because the user said so. Now, it's not that we don't believe that women don't know when they're pregnant, but over twice as many people never responded to the questionnaire as answered, "I'm pregnant." So we don't know a large proportion of the people what really happened there. Another app that has published more recently even is the DOT app. This stands for Dynamic Optimal Timing. This is developed by the IRH group at Georgetown. Basically, they push the fact that it's very simple. All you have to do is enter your period start day, and it will predict your fertile window based on what they claim is a learning algorithm as it captures more and more information about you. Now, to use the app, to qualify to be using DOT, you have to have regular cycles of between 20 and 40 days length. And there is also some inter-cycle variability number, about 9, I think is what it is, that you have to be underneath. If you have greater variability than that, the app will tell you it can't predict your fertile window. It's just going to track your cycles. Again, like natural cycles, it does encourage condom use on the high fertility days. So it's really not an NFP method. The study that was recently published for this involved 618 women, which is a good size study. They had 25 pregnancies in all. They had a very good effectiveness rating, 5% typical and 1% perfect. But again, this is in combination with barriers, so we really don't know what abstinence alone would look like. And almost half the people completed 13 cycles or a full day. It's really pretty good for this kind of study. I talk about the DOT study primarily because I think it's the way studies with fertility trackers will be done in the future. This was done nearly exclusively online. A single center in Georgetown, a single clinical center in Georgetown, was able to run a nationwide clinical trial and communicate with the participants basically through the app and on the phone occasionally. So this was a virtual clinical trial, if you would. Didn't have to have 27 clinical centers to generate the population. Importantly, this is the first study of any method of NFP where we have a diversity of population that actually mimics the US population. So it's not just well-educated, white, largely Catholic women that are participating in this study, which is good. And they had good follow-up to determine pregnancy. But again, they encouraged condom use and they didn't disclose how often that happened, so we have to assume it's fairly often. And importantly, among those 700 and so women who fell within the boundaries of the cycle variability, 13% of them became algorithm ineligible within the confines of the trial. So again, long-term use of DOT, even if used in an NFP context, over 2 or 3 years, there may be a third of the women who can't use it because of this variability. So with some of these new DOTs, a group of us decided to kind of do a little experiment comparing CycleProGo, which is the app that Couple to Couple League provides, and that's based on the Sympto-Thermal Method, and it's consistent with how CCL teaches the Sympto-Thermal Method. So we understand what that looks like, and we compared DOT and natural cycles to CycleProGo using data that we had on hand from the CycleProGo database. We randomly selected 20 women who had 12 cycles or more and we inputted 12 cycles worth of information in DOT and in natural cycles. And then we compared the output, which was the fertile window start and the fertile window end for each app, to see how congruent or lack of congruency we had. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because it gets fairly detailed, but a couple of key points. First, the second bullet point is kind of the bottom line. Only 8% of the beginning of the fertile window and 1% of the end of the fertile windows were consistent across all three apps. So not a lot of congruity between these apps. It was also interesting that in the CycleProGo database, over half the women who had more than 12 cycles did not meet the cycle variability requirements that use DOT as a pregnancy avoiding algorithm. So don't know if we have an atypical cluster in the CycleProGo database or not, but it does speak to the confines of the restrictions there. And when we do a little more digging on the individual comparisons, when we compare DOT to CycleProGo, we see at about 20% of the cycles, the fertile window started later with DOT, started more than 3 days later with DOT 20% of the time, and in 25% of the time, natural cycles had the fertile window starting 3 days later. Now, some of that could be that CycleProGo is overly conservative. Some of it could be that these algorithms are not as conservative as they need to be. About half the time, the fertile window ended earlier with DOT than it did with CycleProGo, and about 2/3 of the time, natural cycles ended the fertile window earlier than CycleProGo. But when we compare the end of the fertile window by DOT and CycleProGo, or DOT and natural cycles to peak mucus day, we found 15% of the cycles DOT had declared the end of the fertile window on or before the day of peak cervical mucus. And in 22% of the time, natural cycles declared the end of the fertile window on or before cervical peak mucus day. And given what we saw from EchoShard's data earlier, that would suggest that these algorithms may not be as accurate as we might wish them to be if we're going to avoid pregnancy with these apps. Now, with so many apps coming out and they're so easy to use, you just enter a few things and the app does the rest of the work. It sort of raises the question, do we really need to train people how to use NFP these days? Does training really matter? And we addressed that in a recent paper by looking at the user habits of various CycleProGo users, and it's summarized here. So within the CycleProGo database, we have people who have no connection to CCL, and we assume that they have no prior formal training in any sort of NFP method. We have CCL members who we know had some training in an NFP method, and importantly, we can track students who come to class and get the app and then open the app as a function of entering the class. And then we have CCL teachers who are using the app themselves to track their own cycles. I won't go through the data in the interest of time, but basically what it says is that NFP instruction really does matter. For people who have taken NFP instruction, they're more likely to use the app correctly, and they're much more likely to use it longer. A lot of people simply start these and drop them in a cycle or two. In fact, I think about 60% of the non-member people downloaded the app but never entered a full cycle. And we also see that with continued use, diligence to daily observation reigns. So a typical student enters a fertility observation on about 95% of cycle days on their first few cycles. But by 6 months, it's about 70% of cycle days. And of course, CCL teachers are the worst. They only record about 71% of the time, which probably is the fact they understand their cycles and when they know they need to record and enter data. But if you think about an algorithm that might be dependent on 80 or 90% of cycle days having data in it, directly use the algorithm, the real world experience of users only doing it about 7 out of 10 days could have a big impact on how it works. So we're next going to turn to urinary hormone monitors, and I'll just do a couple of things to introduce this, and then Richard will take over. So these urinary hormone monitors, they detect metabolites of the reproductive hormones in the first morning urine. They have an excellent correlation with serum hormone levels. And today, the tests basically give you a yes or no answer. Are you above or below a manufacturer-defined threshold? Luteinizing hormone is the most commonly detected. Any ovulation predicting kit, OPK test, will give you a luteinizing hormone value. Estrogen also can be commonly read. And today, the PROVE test strips are the only ones that can do progesterone. But there are more that are either just released in the last few months or about to be released in the next few months that are on their way. And I believe I'm going to hand it, oh, I should just talk a little bit about the Clearblue here. The Clearblue Monitor is sort of the first well-researched monitor that uses the hormones. It detects both estrogen and LH, and a low reading would say that your estrogen is below the threshold level set by the manufacturer. A high means the estrogen is above there, and a peak will be displayed when luteinizing hormone is detected. A peak will be shown for 3 days after it's detected. And of course, Richard has done a lot of work with the Marquette model and this Clearblue Monitor. It's extremely well tested for both avoiding and achieving pregnancy. And I would put in a personal push, I think their postpartum protocol is one of the best that's out there today, and probably the most robust that we have of all of the different methods. And you can see the costs there. It does, you know, there is an investment and an ongoing cost, but for many women, they really like the assurance and the objectivity of the Clearblue Monitor. And I think I now will hand it back over to Richard. I'm going to, I'm going to stop sharing. And Richard, you have to grab control now.
Okay, I think it's mine now. Just two things. When Mike was talking about the DOT app and also the natural cycles, I know that in the latest study with the natural cycles, 74% were using the condom. So when they give the effectiveness data, you have to realize that vastly most are using the condoms during the estimated fertile time. Plus, these methods, the DOT and also the natural cycles, cannot be used during postpartum breastfeeding transitions, probably not perimenopause, so they are limited in use. Okay, Michael ended with the Clearblue Monitor and hormone testing. I'm going to be looking at what I call right now space-age natural family planning. And I have on the slide, there is a new Space Force, which is now one of the armed services under the Department of Air Force. And that's the logo for the new Space Force. So that's why I'm calling it Space-Age NFP. And so in 1991, in the journal Science, one of the developers of the birth control pill, Carl Gerasi, wrote an article called Jet Age Natural Family Planning. And he said in the future that women will be actually being able to measure their hormones. In 1998, it was at a conference at Catholic University sponsored by the USCCB and the Department of Natural Family Planning, and they had a presenter from Unipath, and she had this little monitor and it had lights on it, and I was in the audience, and it was kind of, and she was talking about how it measured hormones and everything. I sort of forgot about it, but when we developed our system at NFP, I was told to talk to Dr. Michael Zinnemann, who was a reproductive endocrinologist at Loyola University, and he said, Richard, you should be utilizing the Clearblue Monitor. And that's one of the reasons that we integrated that newer technology within the Marquette method. But I'm calling that Jet Age Natural Family Planning. In the recent year and going into the future, there's been a big leap, and that's why I call it Space Age NFP. Not only are we able to measure hormones, the reproductive hormones, qualitatively, but able to measure them quantitatively. And that is a big leap in regards to precision and understanding the woman's menstrual cycle and actually what's happening hormonally. The other thing is looking at the cell phone as a measuring device. We know that young people are always carrying their cell phones around. So if that becomes the measuring device and charting system in one, it might aid in regards to the use of it. Now, what I'm going to be talking about a little bit is on PROVE. Mike already talked about PROVE, which is a progesterone test to confirm ovulation. There is, however, three quantitative systems to be able to quantify reproductive hormones. One is MIRA, the other is Premom, and the last one is UVA. And I'm going to talk a little bit about each one. Before I do that, however, there have been newer studies that looked at the precision in regards to hormonal testing. Mike mentioned the 2001 EchoShard study, and that was an older system in regards to looking at ultrasound detecting the day of ovulation. They have refined those methods, and they have redone some of these studies. And I think this is an important study. I'm just going to read the results of it because I think it's important. It says, urinary and serum reproductive hormone showed excellent agreement and may be used interchangeably, urine and serum. The beginning of the surge in serum and urinary LH was an excellent predictor of ovulation. The rise in progesterone and P3G, which is progesterone metabolite, above baseline was a consistent marker of luteinization confirming ovulation. And then and both LH and progesterone surges delivered clear, sharp signals in all volunteers, allowing reliable detection and confirmation of ovulation. Some of the authors are Dr. Günter Freundl from Germany, Dr. Noth, and these are the German NFP group, research group, along with Sarah Johnson from Swiss Precision. I also like this older study in 1999 where the Italians looked at various markers of NFP biomarkers, and they looked at LH, salivary, mucus, and temperature, and you could see the sharpness of the LH in regards to precision. So, proof test. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the study that we did looking at this Prove P test, which came out a couple of years ago. For a number of years, when I've been working with natural family planning, even way back in the early 90s, it was said, well, it'd be nice to have a progesterone test so we can confirm ovulation after the mucus peak, after a temperature shift, and things like that, because it was not always clear. There was an older test by Quidel, but they dropped it. That was back in the 90s. So I participated, and there was, well, there's a major breakthrough in regards to now this P test is available. And it's based upon research study that was developed a protocol to confirm ovulation with hormonal progesterone tests from serum testing by Echoshard, Bouchard et al. And Fehring. And I was on this study, and it was in steroids in 2014, I think. I would have to look at the date. But if you notice, my name is at the end there, and sometimes when you have a name at the end, you think that is the major person of the group, but I was not. However, the results of the study showed that if you have three serum levels of progesterone above, I forgot the number, I think it was 7 or 9, that you have 100% confirmation of ovulation. Now, this is from using serum testing. Now, to get serum testing, you would have to go for a physician, get orders, go to a place to get the blood drawn, and then the lab takes a while. So it'd be nice to have a home test. So about a year or 2 years after this was published, I also got this call from this Dr. Amy Beckley, who was a biologist. And she says, I'm going to develop a urine test based upon these studies. And I said, okay, that's great. And I said goodbye. And I thought, well, I won't hear from her again. But then about maybe 12 months later, she had the test. And so in order to integrate it into our system of natural family planning, I want to do some studies about it. So I already mentioned about the women in regards to it'd be nice to have a self-test using those women use natural family planning to actually confirm ovulation through progesterone testing. So the purpose of our study was to test the use of the new P test, progesterone test, by describing the percentage of menstrual cycles that had a P test confirm ovulation, and to compare the new test with results from the Clearblue electronic hormonal monitor. So just to show you, this shows the levels of PDG in the urine, what they're looking at for, and going above this threshold line, about 5 or 6. So this would be a confirmation of ovulation. If the woman became pregnant, it would just continue high in regards to the progesterone levels, sustaining the pregnancy. Okay, this is what the test strips look like that you develop and the package that you get to, and this is a diagram of how you read it for a positive and negative test. It's from NFP Fertility, and they're available online. So we had 10 of our users, they're actually providers, market model providers, health professionals, who are 42 years of age and less, having ovulatory menstrual cycles, to test the use of both the P-test along with the Clearblue Monitor that provides a level of estrogen, a high, and then a peak when it hits the LH surge. So I was thinking that if the serum, if you need it for 100%, based on that steroid study, that you should have 3 positive progesterone tests. However, as you will see that Dr. Beckley only has to have 1 for positive for confirmation. I'm not sure how true that is. So the problem is we got the test strips from Dr. Beckley. We paid for them, but she lowered, at first it was 7 micrograms per milliliter, but she was finding that there was being a lot of negative tests, and then she lowered it, so then she had newer tests, and this was right in the middle of our study. So we stopped, we had the women do 2 tests, 2 cycles with the 7, the higher threshold, and then 2 cycles with the 5 threshold. It was difficult to get these women to complete it. We had 10 volunteers. They produced 22 menstrual cycles of data, 12 which were using a P-test with a threshold of 7, and 10 with a threshold of 5. We found overall 78% of the menstrual cycles had a positive P-test from 1 to 9 days post the LH surge, 67% using the 7, and 89%, however, using the 5 micrograms per milliliters. The participant used 1 to 3 tests to determine positive P-test. And just to show you, this is our charting system. This is showing and they charted the P-test result. The L would be a negative test, and the P would be a positive test. And you can see this is where the clear blue said this was the LH surge, is the beginning of the estrogen. And with the 7, there was a lot of negatives. However, this shows to 5 to 6 milligrams. You can see that after the P-test, the LH surge, there was 3 positive progesterone tests to confirm ovulation. And this just tracks out the numbers of the day 3 was where the most in regards to being able to detect that level of progesterone. However, again, this is just quantitative levels. It is not qualitative levels. The 5 milligram was, the 89–90% is very similar to detecting LH surges in the urinary early morning urine. We have a lot of our women do a second test of LH getting up to 100%. However, we had no false positive. We also had older women and women with postpartum status. So did that make a difference? And is the LH surge the best indicator before using the progesterone test, or is it the mucus? So potential uses of P-test, and I'll show you some examples at the end. Any woman who is unsure of the peak rating, either mucus or the LH, result in ovulation. When an early peak occurs that are out of context, we find that with PCO women or other women, and you can make sure that that first LH surge or mucus peak was an ovulatory or not. When LH surge is missed, aberrant peaks with women, like I mentioned with PCOS, to confirm ovulation during the postpartum transition. Finding that first ovulation before they go into fertility, regular cycles, is always difficult to do. And this would be one way to confirm that she's actually fertile now, that she's ovulating. Women who have very severe reasons for avoiding might want to use the P-test, and possibly with subfertility. I know that Dr. Beckley is promoting it used for people with subfertility. There's various protocols for using it. This is the protocol that they published: start testing 4 to 5 days after the cervical mucus becomes moist or wet. But they also do a dry date test in the beginning of the menstrual cycle, because sometimes it's difficult to read it because there's always a little sort of a watermark on it, and they wonder whether that's negative or positive. So that's why they do a dry date to show how it looks in the early part of the menstrual cycle. So that was the results of the proof test. Now I'm going to move on to another, a quantitative test. And we're right now in the middle of a study I'm doing with Dr. Chien Mu, who was a women's health fellowship through the Medical College of Wisconsin and the VA, who now works at the VA as a researcher. And she's also associate researcher with me. What we're doing is we're comparing the use of the Premom fertility monitor system, which measures LH, but it does it quantitatively, along with the Clearblue Monitor as the base to compare it with. Dr. Manhart already talked about the Clearblue Monitor. The Premom Fertility Monitoring is a free app that you can download into your cell phone, and it actually reads two types of tests. One is the easy at home test strip, and it measures LH hormones, and you get a ratio, which is more of a qualitative ratio, but it does give you numbers, and it also tells you whether it's low, high, or peak. The Premom test measures LH, but it measures it quantitatively and provides a number. The results are displayed either as a numbers or it tracks it out very nicely on the cell phone app. The cost for the easy at home test strips are about 30 cents per strip. I think you can get like 50 for $15 or 100 for $15, so they're very cheap. I'm very interested in that because the monitor might be a little expensive for people. This is an easier way maybe to get some precision in regards to determining the peak of mucus or the peak in the fertile time. But the Premom tests are a little bit more expensive. They're about $1 per strip, but it gives you quantitative levels. So our study, I just want to mention two preliminary studies that I was involved with, one and also helped with the other one, with Dr. Leva from Canada. We use the LH test strip as a second check using the ovulation method, cervical mucus, and the women found that having the LH surge coincide with the peak of mucus helped them in regards to the precision and the use and understanding of the menstrual cycle. Dr. Barron et al. With Dr. Raviel looked at rating the test strip results as low, high, and peak based upon the colors as they get darker in regards to similar to the reference line on the test strip. And they were able to do that. So it was giving women another marker for a possible beginning of the fertile time. And we utilize this low, high, and peak for these test strips in some of our protocols. What I also found out, because we were telling women to use these test strips and sort of rate them low, high, and peak, with low being negative test strip or very light, high would be a moderate test line, test line compared to the reference line, but not as dark, and then as dark or darker would be a peak. And people are able to do that, but also one of the women that one of our teachers was working with said, well, there's an app out there and there's a test strip that does it already. And we found out it was easy at home. So I wanted to, again, before we use these technologies or recommend it, we always like to do a study. We're in the beginning of the study, and the purpose is compared to the beginning, peak, and length of the fertility in women's menstrual cycle, comparing it with the Clearblue Fertility Monitor. And to determine and compare, we're also looking at satisfaction and ease of use with both the Clearblue Monitor and also the Premom Fertility and the app system. Again, the app actually, you measure, it takes a picture of it and measure it right with the cell phone. So the cell phone, again, becomes the measuring device. What kind of interesting is that we use Google Drive for data collection. So we have 30 folders, and we're able to watch as people are collecting their data, and so we're able to keep up with whether they're keeping up with the study or not. So it was a monthly email communication, but we can look at each folder every day because we're sharing everything in the cloud system. So we had 30 women randomized into two groups, one into the Premom group and 30 into the Easy at Home group. And they had 20 days of testing for each of the cycles, and they're asked to do 3 cycles of testing. When they were done, then they do the satisfaction survey. We had 30 women. They're all white and Catholic, surprising. 93.3% married. Years of being using the Marquette method. They were all Marquette method users because we didn't give them a Clearblue Monitor, so they already had it. Was 3.6 years. We now have just about everybody completed. We have all 15 in the Premom group, which is the quantitative, and we have 15 in the Easy at Home. About 2 or 3 still has 1 or 2 cycles to go. So we're almost at the end of collecting all our data. However, I looked at some preliminary data that Premom people have. It shows the mean number of levels from day 1 to the peak day, which is the LH surge on the monitor. And you can see how the levels do go up, and then you get the peak of the LH at approximately 25 as the number. So I'm looking at, is there a number where we can have also a threshold that you would start giving a high reading so that you would have a predictive analysis. Now this is data from the Premom people. This is some of the data that I just put in from our data. I'm going backwards here. This is day 1 to the LH surge here. And you can see there's a big jump when there's LH surge. Now, I'm not sure if there's a threshold in regards to the beginning of the fertile time as that LH surge go up. So we're going to have a lot of menstrual cycles of data to look at, possibly getting confident intervals around the peak day and also the 5 days before the fertile window to see if there's anything to that. Okay. I just want to show you one case that women already using it. This is a 40-year-old woman with an LH chart. It's hard to see here, but the level of LH is right here on this side. And this is 10, 15, 20. LH test strips that you buy into the drugstores are approximately 20 to 25. So if you look at it, this woman is mostly way above what is a threshold in test strips. And so what does that tell me? It tells me this woman is not fertile anymore. She doesn't need to monitor her fertility. Her LH hormone is trying to get those, and probably her FSH, if you took it, is trying to get that last egg out, and it's not doing well. So this person, I would just say that you don't have to worry about being fertility. Okay, the last one we're going to be talking about is the MIRA fertility monitor, which I'm really excited about. We're also doing a study, and Dr. Thomas Bouchard is the PI on this one. We're going to have 10 to 15 women utilizing both the MIRA fertility monitor and the Easy at Home monitor. The MIRA actually measures estrogen, E3G, LH, and it will be doing progesterone, PD3 eventually. And they also want to add AMH, possibly, the anti-Mullerian hormone in regard to ovarian reserve, and also pregnancy tests all in one, and then other types of things, possibly blood sugar and things like that, utilizing the monitor here. What's nice about the monitor, you know, with the Easy at Home and the Premom, when you have the camera, the result, the quality of the camera on the cell phone that the woman has is going to be a factor. So if you have a monitor here that measures it, but that is Bluetooth to a app, that might be a better system. This shows some of the app, what it looks like and what the numbers that they give you. You can also get a sort of a calendar testing thing, but they also track it out as a hormone levels. Now, we're still waiting for the, you can buy the LH, quantitative LH strips, and they're ready with the E3G, the estrogen strips, to getting the quantitative level, but they don't have the app ready, so we haven't been able to start our study. But Dr. Bouchard has did get a hold of one of the monitors. So, and
did a much better job of saying this is what
he has the results here, which is kind of interesting. The E3G along here, and then the MIRA results, the LH results along here, compared with the Clearblue. Again, the Clearblue, when you get a high, is when the threshold of E3G goes up from the baseline, and you can see it jump from 77, about 100 to 136 E3G. The LH, however, is just way below 5, but then all of a sudden it jumps to 53. And it jumps to 53 the day after the highest reading of the estrogen, or the E3G. So this is Dr. Bouchard's comment. It was nice to see the gradual elevation, then decline in the E3G, and how the E3G peak preceded the LH peak by 1 day. It was nice to see the E3G, estrogen, and LH peaks both rise and fall. It was interesting to note that LH really was not very detectable until right around peak. So I was wondering, is it really a good, provide adequate warning of the fertile window? Now, there's one other product that is very interesting that is out right now, or at least they're taking money for it. It was developed as a spin-off from the Mount Sinai Hospital and Medical School, and Dr. Amy Divarania is the PI and director of this with a number of about 4 or 5 other researchers and scientists. This is also measured by your cell phone, but what they're getting is quantitative levels of the luteinizing hormone and progesterone. And they say this is with clinical accuracy. If you go to their website, it's kind of interesting. They look at this as being a home diagnostic device that you work with your health professional, especially with women's health problem, like PCOS or other types of problems like that. So it'll be interesting. We were going to have both the PROVE study and the MIRA study and also the UVA study at our Science Forum pre-conference at the Catholic Medical Association meeting in San Diego, but because of COVID, it was delayed until next year. So we'll be waiting for that next year, some of the results to come out. I just want to show one case study that we use. Again, one of my teachers, we post them on our teacher training course. And this was a woman who was in wedding cycle. She had, I forgot how many cycles, 7 cycles, but all of a sudden in the wedding cycle, things were getting real long and they were wondering what was happening. And she was out to cycle day 45. She did do a pregnancy test. She wasn't pregnant at that time, but you can see here with the monitor, Clearblue Monitor, she had peak, 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 peak. There's a lot of variability in the cycle, but all of a sudden there was no peak and it just kept on going. Finally, because she was doing the second test, she had a LH test peak, and they thought that, and this was right after the wedding, that they were infertile and they had intercourse, but right at this follow-up, they weren't pregnant. But then they got a positive progesterone test out here. And so this is I guess we would call it a method pregnancy, correct use pregnancy, because they got a positive P test, they had LA surgeons and everything. But we were wondering why the length going out here and not getting the ovulation. It could be due to the stress of the wedding cycle, but she was on SSRI, a serotonin reuptake inhibitor for her depression. And we found out that this type of medicine can increase levels of prolactin. This just shows that she was using the Premom testing in regards to getting test strip results with her phone here. Oops. So all I want to see is that it's possible that does she have PCOS, was it stress or not, but it's interesting how you can get a little bit more information when you're utilizing some of these other hormonals. So I'm going to end saying that we're part of the Dr. Notare's office. The Department of NFP is part of the Secretary for Marriage and Family. So I'm going to end with a marriage that happened. It was my niece who got married during the COVID crisis. She got married in the church first, but then she went to, and it's called, I'm calling a Miller Time wedding, because they entered a contest by Miller Brewery. It was a national contest. There was 10,500 couples that enter, and they won because they were taking pictures during the COVID down at Miller Brewery in Milwaukee with them with their mask on and him proposing and everything, and they won. So after the church wedding, they were asked to repeat their vows at Miller Brewery in Miller Valley by the Miller Inn. And this shows me with my niece, Mary Kate, and Adam, who was a first-year medical student in Evansville, Illinois. And then I had them take a picture in front of this old-time horse wagon. And this shows the Bishop Haynes and Father Kinski blessing their wedding on wedding day. And that's it. So I wanted to share my niece's wedding picture to end.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Fehring and Dr. Manhart. I'll call you Richard and Mike.
Yes,
right
please,
now.
Richard.
That was wonderful. It was so interesting. And if anybody has questions, I would say, because we're running out of time, let's try to do maybe 5 minutes or so, maybe 10 at the most. But why don't you turn on your camera if you'd like to ask a question? I don't see anything in the group chat. And while we're waiting for you to think about that, I think I'd like to ask a very basic general question of the two of you. And that is, what do you think is the future of in-person natural family planning education with today's young adult? Do you think that really is a thing of the past? Do all of these apps give us any type of, does it take a pulse on what the young adult is interested in any longer? Richard, Mike?
I wasn't listening to the beginning of that. So I missed the first part because it was clicking off. So you were saying, do these apps have influence on young people today?
Yeah, I'm trying to get a sense of the mentality of the young adult who comes to NFP education today. Would they be turned off by in-person classes and paper charts and all of that?
Oh, yeah. I think you have to keep up with the technology. And I know some people will continue wanting having paper charts and everything. But I know even my OBGYN friends said they come in with their cell phones and their chart. They show them when they have their menses and things like that. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of variability, but boy, these things are popular. And we showed it in regards to Dr. Polis from the Guttmacher Institute, looked at even the National Survey of Family Growth and found between 20 and 24 among young people who are using methods. When she looked at along with condoms, she found a big uptick with using with that age group, probably because of using these apps.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, CCL's experience is when we had the self-paced online course available, it instantly became 75% of the total instruction for the league. And more recently, CCL has launched a new parish-based Spanish language curriculum where the app is integral to the instruction itself, because in the U.S. Hispanic culture, by and large, reading textbooks and doing that sort of stuff is not part of their rubric, but they've all got phones. And so they learn to interpret and record their mucus observations on the app in the class. And we've even created that class in such a way that it can be delivered by non-experts at a parish setting or one-on-one or in small groups or whatever. And then they're backed up with help. I think what's going to happen is we're going to see more coaching and kind of opportunities for one-on-one engagement, but the formal class in the parish hall, I think that's not a mode of learning that's going to stay there. And COVID has only accelerated that.
Right.
We've all learned how to Zoom.
I would also say, we launched our website in 2008 where we had a charting system and also a forums that I was on every day. And we had 11,000 women on that website. And it was excellent because I was able to look at their charts and consult with them right away in regards to looking at their charts and seeing it charted out. However, we felt that we needed to have a app on a cell phone that also connected to that. And so that's what we're working on right now, but that's not easy to do. But I think that's where it's at, especially, and I think the consultation comes especially, our system was pretty easy that you can teach yourself when you have regular cycles, but it's when you have wedding cycles, like we saw PCOS, postpartum breastfeeding, going into perimenopause. So there's a lot of things that are happening that they really need consultation. And online stuff too, though.
Right. I was going to add the Creighton model fertility care leaders have just come out with their app for their method users. Hopefully I'll have some information I can put in the descriptor after we're finished with this event. But I can see that people are really stirring up the waters. I think even the leadership at FEM has been working on, I think actually they did launch it, didn't they, Richard? Anna Halpine and FEM, I think they launched an app as well for their
The FEM app has about 400,000 users.
Yeah, that's what
They've actually raised to the point where they're being attacked by Planned Parenthood for the messages that they're sending to young girls.
They must be doing something right.
Yes.
Jennifer Fullen, are you interested in asking a question, Jennifer? Oh, no. How about Steve? Were you going to ask a question? I see your video is on.
No, I didn't have any questions. Thank you.
How about Theresa Lewis? Did you want to ask a question?
I think Katie Zumanis had a question. She popped on here.
Theresa, were you going to, yes or no? Okay. Katie?
Hi, I was just gonna agree with what Mike was saying and Richard was saying, but the more that, it seems like from our experience, the more that we push everyone, the more technology that's available for young people, the more, you know, they really crave the personal interaction. So to Mike's point, you know, that coaching and Richard saying like unusual cycles, people really, really appreciate someone to accompany them. So that's what we've been experiencing.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And also, as we talked before with USCCB, especially with the coordinators, is that it's not only learning the method, but as Catholics and everything, it's helping them integrate the fertility and levels of understanding of why they're using natural family planning for marriage and everything. So part of that is helping them to reach higher levels of integration, with our teachers usually do.
Right, exactly. I mean, you know, as we keep saying, natural family planning methods are an ethical skill set to support God's plan for married love and life. So that's the whole point of us being involved in this. And we certainly are so grateful to the two of you for fighting the good fight and keeping us up to date on all of this information. If there are no more questions, I think we'll end on a high note. So why don't we all say a glory be to end our time together. And again, thank you again, both Richard and Mike, and thank you everyone for coming along and listening in. As I said, I'll be posting this event on YouTube in the next couple of days. So hopefully it'll have even wider outreach to other people who are interested. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen.
Amen.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. God bless the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Thank you.
Okay, amen. Thanks for the opportunity of presenting.
Yes, thank you so much for your attention. Take care, everyone.
God bless.